He wants exams to be pushed back to allow extra teaching time, saying students have a mountain to climb after losing up to 6 months of lessons. 2 men have been arrested on suspicion of terror offences after RAF jets intercepted a passenger flight to Stansted Airport. The pair from Kuwait and Italy were detained after arriving on a Ryanair flight from Vienna. It's understood that the crew were alerted to a security threat on board. Time to see how the weather is looking this fine Monday morning. Here's Nas.
Get ready for safe skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Well, for some of us, it's a bank holiday Monday, and usually that means terrible weather. But actually, it's not looking too bad for today. Most places will be mainly dry and bright. But from today onwards, we will start to see a more unsettled conditions spreading in from the west in the way of spells of rain and strengthening winds. But until then, as I said, a mainly dry start out there this morning. There's bright or sunny spells. It is quite chilly, though, particularly in some rural spots where in some sheltered areas there could be a bit of a frost as well. And there are 1 or 2 showers around eastern coastal counties as well. But we see little change into this afternoon, apart from the fact that it will become a bit warmer with the light winds and the sunshine. There will be a little bit of fair weather cloud bubbling up, but maybe turning that sunshine hazy at times, but nothing too drastic. And there will still be the 1 or 2 showers around the east, particularly around East Anglia, but they will be few and far between. But as I initially mentioned, we will see more unsettled conditions spreading in from the west. By this evening, rain, cloud and strengthening winds will spread to Western Ireland and spread eastwards to the north and west overnight.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
The time is 7:42. You're watching Sky News at breakfast. Still to come, I'll be taking a look at what's making the morning's papers. I'm joined by the co-founder of Challenges NI, Thomas Copeland, and the sociologist Ashley Frawley. That's next.
On November 1st, 2006, 2 Russian agents released a deadly nuclear poison The agents were on a mission to kill former KGB spy Alexander Litvinenko. But there was another man in the hotel bar that afternoon, and his life became intertwined with Alexander Litvinenko from that day forward. From Sky News' multi-award-winning podcast, Storycast, now comes Polonium and the Piano Player. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. With us this morning, once again, to review the papers, the co-founder of the news website Challenges NI, Thomas Copeland, and the sociologist Ashley Frawley. Good to see you again, guys. We're going to one of your choices first this hour, Thomas. The front page of the Daily Mirror, the biggest test yet, kids returning to school.
This week, yes, there'll be 9 million young people who are heading back to the classroom. Parents who've been homeschooling since March might be delighted to see their children off to school, but there are many more challenges that lay ahead, as the Mirror details this morning. A survey that they quote verifies what most common sense observers might tell you, which is that social distancing in a school environment is difficult, if not nigh on impossible. Another government U-turn there on Friday over face coverings has added to the general sense of confusion in schools. Many of them have dedicated huge amounts of time and financial resources out of their own budget to tackle this problem. That comes in the form of one-way systems round the school, hand sanitizing and social distancing. But the key thing here is going to be an effective test and trace system. That's the only way we can really protect our schools against more outbreaks into the rest of the winter. A big question I would have for the Education Secretary would be what plans are in place if there are localised or national lockdowns in schools. When a lockdown first came in March, there was no overall education strategy for how children should be taught. It was all down to individual schools' policies, and that really meant that there was no continuity according to the education standards. That cannot be the case if there are localised or national lockdowns in schools into the winter. Gavin Williamson wrote a letter on Friday telling parents that it would be detrimental to their children's education and indeed their lives if they weren't back in school. But if parents are put in a position where they need to choose between their child's education and their child, or maybe even their family's health, I know which way most parents would go.
Well, let's ask a parent who handily is in the box right next to you. Ashley, you mentioned last hour that your eldest is 4, I think. Does that mean they might be off to reception this year? I mean, how are you feeling as a parent?
Yes, so she's off to reception next week, and I'm actually really excited about this. I think it's a very important part of her socialization. She needs to be around other children. It's not good for her. She's been away from other children and her friends for a really long time. And even my 2-year-old, she's developed a new word, cutavirus, where we can't do this, cutavirus. We can't do anything because of the virus. And I think that's really unfortunate. And I think a lot of parents feel like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, they know how important school is for their children. And on the other hand, they are afraid, and they may be afraid for vulnerable people within their families and so on. And I think there's really a need to have something in place for those people who feel they are vulnerable. But what's ended up happening is we've had blanket policies, and that's made it more difficult to protect people who are really in need. And so we have school budgets really, really stretched, trying to protect absolutely everyone. And it's become like a leaky bucket. Trying to protect everybody means that we're not really protecting anyone particularly well.
Well, just tell us a little bit about that story in the front page of The Guardian, then, the exclusive from The Guardian's Ben Quinn, that they're having to weigh up pupil safety against financial stability. I mean, that's a situation and a half.
So schools were already really stretched, and they are really not in a position to be dealing with a public health crisis. So head teachers are warning that they need about £2.38 billion more if they are to be ready. And because it's not just about hand sanitizing stations and cleaners, that's a huge cost as well. But also what happens, as Thomas said, what happens in the event of a lockdown? Are they ready for that? Do they have, internet dongles and laptops available for students. Not every family has a lot of these things available, and you've got multiple family members trying to use them. And so there are all these kinds of spiraling costs. The extra time on the part of teachers, like moving teaching online, is incredibly resource intensive if you want it to be effective. So there's all of these sorts of things going on. I think, again, this is what happens when we've had policies that completely ignore the epidemiological profile and actual risk factors associated with severe outcomes related to catching COVID-19. We've decided to kind of have a blanket approach. So you've got healthy people on an expensive furlough scheme. The beginning, at the height of the crisis, of the pandemic, we had people actually being discharged, potentially ill people being discharged into care homes, which is the place in society that actually needed those resources to be directed to. And so this blanket policy approach has created these financial problems that easily spiral out of control because we're not directing our attention and resources to particular areas of society.
Thomas, take us to the foreign pages of the Times, and it's a story that has been going on now for several months, those continuing protests taking place in the United States. Donald Trump now demanding a crackdown. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm sensing this becoming something of one of the bigger issues ahead of the presidential election in November.
That's right. This piece reflects on what will be a central theme of the November election, which will be what everybody is calling law and order. Further riots over the weekend in Portland have really reasserted this issue to the centre of the campaign. Riots, of course, sparked by the murder of George Floyd and the shooting of Jacob Blake. Donald Trump has recognized that there's a potential weak spot in the Biden campaign over this issue. His campaign and the people behind him are firmly in favor of strong police reform, but obviously very against the kind of violence and protests and riots that we've seen over the weekend. And in fact, they've recognized this. The appointment of Kamala Harris as the VP pick it may put off some of the younger radicals who don't want to see a former attorney general of the state of California as their VP pick. But that tells you how much the issue of law and order is important to the Biden campaign, that they need to be able to prove that they are hard and firm on this issue. This is in the context of increasingly narrowing polls between Biden and Trump. This election is far from over. There's increased optimism on the Trump campaign that they will be able to close the gap before November. The gap, of course, that Biden has held really for the majority of this year after Donald Trump's central theme of campaigning, which was the strong economy, floundered and dissipated in the face of COVID-19. A little note on that polling as well. I mean, Biden's been ahead in the national polls and in the key swing states as well. But the thing to look out for in this election will be in the enthusiasm ratings. That, I believe, will be what decides this election. Trump supporters are, just under the majority, as I say, in those polling that polling data. But they will be there on polling day to vote for their man. The fear in the Biden campaign is that there will be a general sense of apathy. He doesn't have the same enthusiasm, charisma, message that Barack Obama did in 2008. And he might suffer the same fate that Hillary Clinton did last year, which was that voters didn't turn out for him on the day. So, a positive thing that Trump might attempt to do is actually downplay the significance of this election in order to engender a sense of voter apathy. This election is far from over. And, right now, I don't know where I would put my money, the honest truth.
Ashley, take us inside the Daily Mail. A fascinating little piece, this, suggesting that the race for a vaccine could in some fashion risk worsening the pandemic. What's going on here?
So scientists have warned that the race to develop a vaccine has moved from a really encouraging attempt at global cooperation to this kind of this race to become first to develop a vaccine. And if things get rushed, and there have been a few reports from lead scientists that that certain corners may be cut, and it's actually part of the reason why it takes so long to develop a vaccine is because there's a need for human trials. And it's often the case that we don't notice or realize the side effects of vaccines until they're actually approved and rolled out into the population. So, for example, in 1999, a vaccine for rotavirus was withdrawn from the market after it was found that it caused bowel obstruction in a number of babies. And that's something that you couldn't know just from doing a trial, even a very large trial, because obviously when you roll that out into a population, populations are